G'day everyone, it's Peter Dunn here from the Australia at War website. I've been trying all night to get this Facebook live stream to work via Zoom, and it was playing up for me, so it's finally working. So it's getting a bit late in the night, but nevertheless I'll proceed. What I wanted to do was just do a very quick presentation on the use of military radio in Brisbane during World War II. And I'll just load this slide up. So this talk is dedicated to First Lieutenant Henry Flora, who's still alive. He turned 102 on the 16th of February 2020. He was the commanding officer of the radio transmitting site at Hemmant on the south side of Brisbane. He's been emailing me and providing me with lots of information on that particular site during World War II. Just to set the scene, Pearl Harbor was attacked on the 7th of December 1941. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, the Americans were in the process at that stage of strengthening their military might in Java and the Philippines. And after that attack on Pearl Harbor on the morning of the 7th of December 1941, an American convoy, the Pensacola convoy, comprising 9 ships protected by the USS Pensacola, was headed to the Philippines at that time. And after a lot of toing and froing, President Roosevelt directed it to be diverted to Brisbane. The convoy arrived in Brisbane just before Christmas on the 22nd of December 1941. And the most senior officer on board, Major General Julian Barnes, disembarked and set up his headquarters, which was known as the US headquarters in Australia, in the Lennon's Hotel, the original Lennon's Hotel on George Street. So that was known as US Forces in Australia, USFIA. Those headquarters only lasted in Lennon's Hotel for about a week, and they were relocated to Melbourne on the 3rd of January 1942. Later, that unit changed its name and became known as the United States Armed Forces in Australia, or USAFIA. When they moved to Melbourne, they left behind a small group of officers in Lennon's Hotel. So they lived and worked in Lennon's Hotel. They became known as headquarters troops, they became known as headquarters US troops in the Brisbane area. That started the only invasion we actually had in Australia during World War II. We were invited by the Americans, or the Yanks. A number of the units from that Pensacola convoy of 9 ships stayed in Brisbane. They disembarked and immediately required accommodation. So that started the frantic acquisition of buildings, parks, schools, houses, etc., to house that growing invasion of Americans. People living at places like Ascot and Hamilton were thrown out of their nice houses so that a general or a very senior officer could live in that house. They were only given 3 or 4 days' notice. General MacArthur escaped from the Philippines in March 1942 and initially set up his headquarters in Melbourne, in the city. And he eventually relocated to Brisbane by train, arriving in Brisbane on the 23rd of July 1942 at the old South Brisbane railway station. He set up his general headquarters, Southwest Pacific area, in the AMP building, which you can see on the right there. And he had his office up here, probably that window there, or this one maybe, I'm not sure, one of those 2 windows, in the old in the boardroom, because it was a fairly new building at that stage, in the boardroom of the AMP building. A lot of people don't realise that he actually stayed in Brisbane from that July 42 right through until September 1944. So he was there for over 2 years prosecuting the war from that office in Brisbane. He did make a lot of trips up to Port Moresby, etc., and various locations around Australia. When the Americans arrived in Australia, they carved Australia up into what was known as base sections. We became base section 3 with headquarters in Brisbane. Townsville area was base section 2. Darwin was headquarters for base section 1, etc., as you can see on that map there. Base section 3 headquarters was established in Somerville Girls' Schools. That's a colour photo from World War II, or it's 2 colour photos from World War II. Taken by Lieutenant Mark T. Muller, who was in charge of the signal office inside base section 3 headquarters at Somerville Girls' School. So that's him in that bottom right, whoops, we'll just go back, in that bottom right corner, just there. That's Mark T. Muller. He took a lot of colour photos during World War II. A bit of history there on Muller. I won't go into all of that as it's late in the night, and I just want to fly through this a little bit. A bit more info on Lieutenant Muller. He set up many teletype machines there at Somerville Girls' School, and circuits then across to General Headquarters and out to the various radio sites. He operated a teletype repair school in a leased building, which I think was on the south side of Brisbane. It operated from June through to May, June 42 to May 44. And so the main thing with the wireless sites that operated in Australia was they were part of the Army Command and Administrative Network, or ACAN. The Signal Corps built up this modern worldwide communications network using various radio transmitting and receiving sites. It allowed communications from Australia, and in MacArthur's situation from Brisbane, directly across to San Francisco, and then by landline to Washington, DC. So there were transoceanic radio links directly from Brisbane through to San Francisco. There's a couple of radio charts which I'll show you shortly, but the one dated May 42 showed the following ACAN radio stations in the Pacific area. One in Melbourne as its call sign, Hawaii, Noumea, Darwin, Townsville, Sydney. So at that time, MacArthur was still operating out of Melbourne, so Brisbane didn't feature at that particular point in time. As I said, MacArthur moved his general headquarters from Melbourne to Brisbane in July 42, and the central hub for ACAN quickly moved from Melbourne to Brisbane. So that's what the ACAN network looked like in May 42, also with the radio link up to Corregidor, because in early May 42 it still had not been captured by the Japanese, but that was about to change. So you can see links to San Francisco, to Hawaii, Noumea, and one up to Townsville. And then as MacArthur moved his headquarters to Brisbane, that all changed. Melbourne just became an outlier to Brisbane, and you can see the circuits as they were in July 1942, which was the month that MacArthur moved to Brisbane. There's another map of the ACAN networks. That was in 1944, and as you can see, it's quite an extensive network of radio links by 1944. Sorry, there's another ACAN map dated June 45. By that time, of course, MacArthur had moved to the Philippines and was operating out of Manila, and his initial radio sites were based on ships that were fitted out with radio transmitters and receivers at Bulimba on the Brisbane River during World War II. And that's actually a chart on the wall on board one of those ships in the Philippines, showing the radio links at that particular point in time, coming out of the Philippines, just here, back to New Guinea, and I guess that's Alandia, I guess there, and down to Brisbane. I was lucky enough to get, while he was still alive, a copy of this diagram that Hank Hendrickson of the 832nd Signal Service Company had drawn, showing all the various circuits for the radio sites in Brisbane during World War II. A very valuable sketch, and I've managed to redraw that and tried to some extent simplify it and make it a little bit easier to read. And I've converted some of the call signs that you can see, for instance, here. If you go to the next one, I've actually then put the name rather than the call sign, so it's a little bit easier to understand. And there's all the call signs, the wireless call signs for the various radio sites that operated in the Southwest Pacific area during World War II. One of them you can see down the bottom here is Central Bureau. So that's where the code breakers were, at 21 Henry Street in Brisbane, out near Eagle Farm. There were a number of signal centres, signal offices, etc. around Brisbane. I've just grabbed a few entries from the December 1942 telephone directory for Brisbane, from the military telephone directory, showing Base Section 3 headquarters at Somerville Girls' School, up the top right there, top left, should I say. There's general headquarters in the AMP building, 5th Air Force, which was at that stage in the AMP building, and Air Service Command in the AMP building, and that one there is General Blamey's headquarters out at the Queensland University. So one of the radio sites that was in Brisbane was the Capalaba radio receiving site. That building in the background there still exists, and it hopefully is about to be heritage listed. That is located just off Old Cleveland Road East at Capalaba. It's probably called Birkdale though these days, but during World War II it was known by the Americans as Capalaba, so that's the name that I'll use in this presentation. Here's a World War II photograph of that site. There's that same building. You can see a tent there to the left, and another building which I think is not there anymore. The other interesting thing in the photo are all these wood poles, and they were used, and you can see them over here in the background as well, and a few cattle by the looks of it. They were used to form up the rhombic antennas that provided that link over to San Francisco. Close-up building of the radio receiving site at Capalaba. There's a plan that I found on the National Archives website. That's a layout of 3 of the initial rhombic antennas that were at Capalaba radio receiving site. That's a plan off the National Archives website. And that's what a rhombic antenna looks like. So you can see the wood poles, and then they string up the wires and have them insulated from the wood pole with insulators that you can just see here. And then it feeds into the transmitter building in this case, in that diagram. They're very directional antennas. That's a close-up of the circuits from that other big diagram that I had earlier, showing what circuits were coming into the Capalaba receiving site. And on this sketch, I've included the call signs as well. The site was originally at that time owned by Doug and Rosemary Cotton. It was 255 acres. The American soldiers who worked there camped behind the Capalaba Hotel, and the officers took over the hotel itself for their barracks. They soon discovered that there was no telephone at the hotel. In fact, no one in Capalaba had a telephone. back in those days. And the Yanks being the Yanks, within a very short period of time, they had erected a pole line into Brisbane to provide communications to Somerville House, which was the main communication centre, out to Capella Bar, and a further 10 pairs out to Redland Bay Golf Club, which I'll talk about shortly. They had some civilian guards on duty, and they would ride around this perimeter on horseback at night. However, one night one of the guards challenged something they heard in the bush. They got no reply, fired a number of shots, and they ended up killing one of the local cows. So after that, apparently the guards handed in their guns and they carried truncheons. So that's a World War II photo of the Capella Bar radio receiving site. And I believe that's the signal corps motto, insignia, should I say, that the Americans would have placed on the front of the hotel. So that's taken on the 11th of November 1943. Across the road from the hotel was the garage and shop, and you can see the signs there with Tristram's, Peter's Ice Cream, Shell. You can see the 4 Bowsers, I can see, 5 Bowsers, should I say, all the different brands. The Yanks requested that the garage actually be shut down. I guess they saw it as some sort of a risk or whatever. And they asked the owner's wife to provide them with meals 3 times a day, which I'm sure she got paid for. The Americans also arranged to have Coca-Cola on sale in the shop there on the left. In late 42, a circuit was added from Capella Bar, or into Capella Bar from Port Moresby. In February 43, a high-speed BOAM circuit from Capella Bar to San Francisco was closed down, and it was replaced with a high-speed tele-type system. And at that stage, the transmit power at Hemmant, the other site that I'll talk about soon, was increased to 40 kilowatts. The system then used 3 teletype machines on frequency diversity to help correct fade or message dropout. Messages were mechanically encoded and decoded, and the Brisbane traffic from the radio sites in Brisbane reached 1 million words a day at its peak. That's just a note that I found in the National Archives asking for a number of circuits to be installed from Somerville House to the Capella Bar and Redland Bay Golf Club radio sites. There's a bit of a myth floating around that General MacArthur slept overnight at the Capella Bar radio receiving site during the Battle of the Coral Sea so that he could be kept up to date with what was happening in the battle. In fact, in May 42, which was when the Battle of the Coral Sea happened, in early May 42, around about the 4th to the 7th of May, MacArthur was still based in Melbourne. So there's absolutely no truth in that rumour. And he's, being US Army, probably wouldn't have been listening to US Navy radio transmissions. So another myth busted. One of the other sites in Brisbane was the Redland Bay radio transmitting site. That was at the Redland Bay Golf Club. They had initially a 1 kilowatt federal transmitter set up in a tent, and eventually they had 5 large rhombic antennas erected across the golf course. Later on, they replaced the 1 kilowatt transmitter with a 10 kilowatt transmitter. You can see the transmitting building here. This is sort of the front road where you drive today up to the golf club. And there's a diesel plant, underground storage, diesel tanks, and the building. That's a diagram just showing 5 of the rhombic antennas that were erected at the Redland Bay radio transmitting site. That's a close-up of the circuits that were exiting the Redland Bay radio transmitting site, going to all sorts of locations, as you can see, and they would select the appropriate rhombic antenna to transmit to the appropriate location. It's a photo from 11th of November 1943 showing that transmitting building there on the left in the bush, and some of the poles you can see for the rhombic antennas that were erected out around the site. This was the old clubhouse at the golf club that was used by the enlisted men for their barracks, and I took this photo at the bottom a number of years ago of that same building, but as of today it has since been demolished. If you walk around the golf club in the bushes, etc., you'll find some of the remnants of the guy structures, these to tether the guy ropes up to the wood poles. Some of the concrete's been pulled out of the ground, and you'll find a number of those around the site. The first circuit to San Francisco was established in July 42. Of course, that's the month that MacArthur arrived in Brisbane. That involved the radio receiving site at Capella Bar and the transmitting site at Redland Bay Golf Club. The circuit was established and messages are sent with a hand key using Morse code, and traffic then started flowing from MacArthur's general headquarters through Somerville House out to the transmitter at Redland Bay and back in to the Capella Bar receiving and back into MacArthur's headquarters. The 10 kilowatt amplifier for the Brisbane San Francisco circuit, as I said earlier, arrived later on, and they set up a high-speed rapid Morse system using that 10 kilowatt amplifier. The operator in Brisbane would input messages via a punched hole paper tape inserted into a sending head, which is a variable speed head, and then key the transmitter at Redland Bay Golf Club. And on a dry day, that open wire telephone lines from Somerville Girls' School out to Redland Bay would allow up to 100 words per minute through to San Francisco. There were 3 receivers at Capella Bar tuned to San Francisco. Receiver number 1 was on the San Francisco rhombic antenna, number 2 on the Hawaii rhombic antenna, and number 3 they changed around to various other antennas. As I said, there were up to 5 eventually. The output of the 3 receivers went into a 3-channel device which selected the strongest signal of the 3, and that rekeyed an audio oscillator which was sent over the telephone lines to Inca tape at the operating room in Somerville House in Brisbane. Righto, the Hemmant radio transmitting site, that's a World War II photo of the transmitting building, and there's the same building today, now used as a house. Mr. Boylo sent me this photo and sent me that scan of his ID card for when he was working at the Hemmant transmitting station. That's a close-up of the circuits that emanated out of the Hemmant radio transmitting site. You can see Oro Bay, China, and India, New Delhi, and of course San Francisco and Noumea and New Guinea. This is a diagram that I drew up with a bit of help from that 102-year-old gentleman, First Lieutenant Henry Flora, who's still alive, who was the commanding officer at Hemmant. So we've got the AMP building where MacArthur had his headquarters linked through to Base Section 3 headquarters via the pole circuits, the 10 circuits out to the Hemmant transmitting site, through the transmitter, out through the rhombic antenna, across the ocean to San Francisco, and then a two government full period telephone lines through to Washington DC. Now I've highlighted there that they used these circuits for the Sig Saley system, which was a secure voice conferencing system that MacArthur used. And I'll talk about that hopefully a little bit later if we've got enough time. There's Henry Flora there in the middle of that photo. And that looks like it's probably down at Bulimba on the Brisbane River when he was became the CEO of the two transmitting ships that were being set up at Bulimba for seaborne communications to be used by MacArthur when he moved forward to the Hollandia in the Philippines. Henry sent me not that long ago a couple of photos. He took it upon himself in March last year at the age of 101 to visit the transmitting site at San Francisco that was used during World War II. You can see on the top of the building at the top left there that it was owned by RCA, and in this photo here you can see the rhombic antenna poles in the background behind Henry. That's a photo of a World War II photo of the single sideband panel here on the left at Hammond that Henry sent me. That's the Western Electric 1 kilowatt single sideband transmitter, a D15600. That's in 1944. Some more equipment inside the Hammond transmitting site here in Brisbane during World War II. And another photo. All the guys who worked here lived on site. Henry had a little cubby hole, as he called it, with a cot just at the back there to the left behind the doors that at the back there. That this photo is looking in the opposite direction to the big open doors where the equipment came through. The 10 kilowatt press wireless transmitter to New Delhi is on the left in this photo. That's one of the very high poles at Hammond. You can just see the insulators on the guy ropes or guy wires, etc. That's in February 1945. That's some old photos. I think, they're 1950s roughly photos, come from Len Maloney of the site. You can see it's very wet. Typically, radio transmitting and receiving sites were on low swampy ground to get very good earth resistivity. The boys at Hammond used to go down to Wynnum to this cafe, which they said was on the corner, and for their meals. They were on a per diem arrangement with the army, so they got a certain amount each day to pay for their meals. There they are, probably sitting near that store, left to right, with Henry Flora at the far right. There were 9 men plus Henry Flora based at Hammond, and as I said, they lived on site. They were attached to the 997th Signal Service Company of the 832nd Signal Service Battalion. They multitasked and all carried out the same duties. They had 8-hour operator shifts, 24 hours a day. Once a week, Henry would put them through some military training. I'll just skip along. There's Henry on his 100th birthday on the 16th of February, 2 years ago, operating his Crosley receiver for the first time since 1930. His son's got it out of the cupboard and dusted it off. And this is an old vacuum tube, valve tube that his sons Bob and Steve had mounted for him and presented to him on his 100th birthday. One of the other sites in Brisbane the Americans used was the Rockley site. It was also used for transmitting. I've labelled it here a receiving site. It's there's Ipswich Road, heading north, and this is Sherwood Road heading towards the Brisbane markets, sort of up here on the right, and the Rockley Hotel is just in here somewhere. So that's a close-up. You can see the buildings here and the paddock, and you can just sort of see things that are probably the bases of poles that form part of the rhombic antennas. Pretty simple site, just a circuit to San Francisco and one to New Delhi. Here's a diagram I found for a typical teletype circuit arrangement that was used over the ACAN network. I'm not going to try to explain it, mainly because I don't understand it. I'm a power guy. I'm not a milliwatt guy. I'm a megawatt guy. That's a typical teletype room. This isn't actually in Brisbane. It happens to be inside a very large bunker at Garbutt in Ramsay Street that I used to play in when I was a kid. So this is the 911th Signal Depot Company in the command bunker there at Garbutt with a room full of teletype machines connected out over the radio networks that they had there in Brisbane. Now, I mentioned early Sig Sauer. So Sig Sauer was pretty intriguing. A lot of people think digital technology is something relatively modern. It was actually used for the first time here in Brisbane during 1943. Its code name, another name that it had was the Green Hornet. It was a top secret system developed by Bell Laboratories and provided MacArthur with a secure voice conference system, which went out over those radio transmitting and receiving sites back to San Francisco and allowed MacArthur to talk to the president and the chiefs of staff at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. in the USA. It was powered by 40 racks of equipment, around about 55 tons worth of it, that was located in the basement of the AMP building where MacArthur had his headquarters. It arrived in Brisbane by ship on the 28th of September 1943. So that's what one of the end terminals looks like. This, in fact, is the transmit half of a Sig Sauer terminal, and the receive end looked fairly similar. You'll notice here there's two phonographic records that are on this sort of turntable arrangement. The way this system was secured was they had codes on those two records, and you had to have the same codes at the transmit end and the receive end, and they had to be running in time synchronized, and that's the way they secured it. And it's a fairly smart way that they develop these codes. I won't go into it, but it's very, very clever. The system was very secure. It wasn't declassified until, I believe, 1976. The Germans knew about it, but never broke it. The Japanese never knew it existed. So the first voice contact was made between Washington and Brisbane, which was known as Terminal 4, on the 2nd of November 1943. And two conferences were then held on the 6th and the 8th of November before it was officially commissioned and handed over to MacArthur as a going concern. There's a photo of a typical teleconference that they would have. That's the US Army Deputy Chief of Staff in Washington, in the Pentagon, with a couple of his buddies. Not sure who they're talking to, but that would have looked fairly similar to what they would have used in Brisbane at MacArthur's end of the Sig Sauer system. The Redland Bay transmitting site and the Cabela Bar radio receiving site, and also the Hemmant site, played a significant role in the operation of Sig Sauer during World War II. As the Japanese were pushed back and MacArthur needed to move his headquarters further forward, he devised a plan whereby they would set up radio transmitting and receiving sites and also a Sig Sauer terminal on board what they called ocean lighters or oil lighters, which they purchased from Sydney and fitted them out on the Brisbane River at Bulimba. There were 7 of them, 2 of them were turned into transmitting stations that First Lieutenant Henry Flora looked after. There were another 2 that became radio receiving sites, and another one which is a Sig Saley site. And the other one was turned into a press ship for war correspondence. There's a photo of one of the radio receiving ships at Bulimba during World War II in 1944. There's some men working on that same ship. Same ship yet again at Bulimba on the 14th of June 1944. And there's pretty much quite a few of the ships, as you can see, with their antennas, having 2 poles at the front of the ship and another 2 poles at the back, and they somehow set up their rhombic antenna array, and I guess they pointed the direction of the ship in the required direction to either receive or transmit to the overseas station that they were transmitting or receiving from. So that's at Bulimba during World War II. That's their accommodation ship, the USS Warona. That's their teletype machine that they used. That's the one on board the receiving ship. That's the Sig Saley ship on OL 31. The other bit of technology, pretty whiz bang for its time, in July 43, they set up a radio photo station at an old house called Sintra, which was located right beside Cloudland Ballroom, which at that time was used by the Yanks as a camp. It was known as Camp Luna Park. So they were able to use this gadgetry that you see in the photo here to send photographs by electronic means over the ACAN radio network through those transmitting and receiving stations in Brisbane. So they would send and receive photos to and from San Francisco. ACAN also had a connection with a unit, the 61st Machine Records Unit, an American unit that operated IBM tabulators in the Catholic Centre in Edward Street during World War II. They used these tabulators with the punch card, you can see here, to compile reports of the name, rank and serial numbers of all the troops in the Southwest Pacific area, the unit they were in, where they were located, where they were going, where they'd been. That was all sent back via those radio links back to Washington, DC. IBM tabulators were also used by the code breakers at 21 Henry Street at Ascot for breaking the Japanese katakana code. So that house is still there today, but the garage is gone, but replaced by an identical garage. The code breakers at 21 Henry Street, or Central Bureau was the name of the unit there, had a number of field units. One of them was this American unit, the 126 Signal Radio Intelligence Company. They operated a radio station with 6 rhombic antennas at Northgate initially. And that photo there is at Northgate, and that's a photo of their direction finding antenna. So they also had a number of direction finding stations as well. Northgate proved to be too boggy and they relocated to Stafford. And you can see the men here inside the building at Stafford on their radio sets, typing out Japanese messages that they're listening to, Morse code messages. And that's where that radio site was at Stafford, for those who know their geography on the north side of Brisbane. Some pictures from the walls inside that building showing Japanese frequency signals that they were listening to and the locations. They used the DF stations to triangulate to get the locations. That's their radio repair shop at Stafford. Another one of the field units for the code breakers at 21 Henry Street was this Australian Army unit. There were also a number of RAAF wireless units around Australia and New Guinea that fed Japanese intercepted messages through the code breakers. So this one was Australian Army Special Wireless Group located at Kalinga, just off Shore Road, just to the west of Shore Road. And that's where the Shore Park Tennis Centre is today. And you can see a compound here with a barbed wire fence around it, 6 buildings, and that's where the receiving radios we used to intercept those Japanese messages. That's some photos of that camp. You can see the rhombic antenna poles, not very good photos, unfortunately. There was another radio site here at Archfield, diagonally opposite the Archfield airfield. The control tower is just up here, the old control tower. And there was another site over here, which I'll talk about shortly, just in there, that the Americans had. And there it is there, just there. And that was known as the Archfield Radio Receiving Site, operated by the 419th Signal Company. And there's a photo of some of the buildings of that site and one of the US Army vehicles parked there. The US Navy had a radio site at the US Navy flying boat base down at Combsley or Combsley Park during World War II. And the RAF had a number of signal officers around Brisbane. They established a signal office on the 7th floor of the AMP building in early 1942, which later became known as RAF Command Signals Office. They also used Reed House as their wireless telegraphy station, and they used a radio transmitting station at Archfield and another one at Amberley. And they also had a receiving station at Zillmere in a large bunker, which I'll show you very shortly. Just a little bit of info on what happened at Reed House. There were 9 teleprinters there going to various locations that you can see listed. I'm just rushing a bit because I need to finish. And that's a photo of what the bunker would have looked like at Zillmere Road at near Cabbage Street Creek. Not Zillmere Road, Beams Road at Zillmere, next door to Cabbage Street. That was a RAF remote receiving bunker. And as part of my research for this talk, I found quite a few manuals for various bits and pieces of World War II radio equipment. And that's the end of my talk. Sorry I rushed it a bit, but I did have to rush because I wasted a lot of time trying to get Facebook Live to work earlier in the night. So thank you for listening. I hope this actually did work. Be a shame if it didn't. And I'll see you another time. Thanks very much. See you later. Bye.